doctors in training have been departing hospitals en masse here in Korea, while over in Brazil on the margins of the G20 meeting, top diplomats from South Korea, Japan and the US addressed global security concerns. So what is the latest regarding the standoff between the medical arena and the government here? And how are trilateral diplomatic interactions affecting geopolitical concerns? Also, what is the significance of South Korea designating a Defector Day? Hope your work week is off to a good start. You're watching Monday's edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min Sunhee. We start with a look at some of these stories making headlines here and elsewhere as well with our panel of foreign journalists. For this, I have Malene Jensen here in the studio. Malene, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you.
I also have Celio Fioretti with us. Celio, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Pleasure to be on Arirang.
Right. Malene, let's start off here on the domestic front. There has been a massive departure by doctors in training from major hospitals in the country in response to government plans to expand the medical school admissions quota, which is causing, of course, quite a bit of concern. What is the latest on that front?
Well, actually, up to around 70% of all trainee doctors have been handing in their resignation. There has been massive protests. And actually, experts are saying that due to this protest, all medical surgeries and so might actually take up to a year to get back into the same speed as it is right now. So it's already had a very, very big impact on the medical system in Korea. So the problem is that the trainee doctors are angry that the Korean government is planning to have more than 40% new medical students as of next year. The trainee doctors are saying that this is a problem because there will be a lot of competition amongst the new doctors. And also they're saying that the government is not really addressing the actual issue. So the issue for the trainee doctors is that they work way too long hours, 80 to 100 hours a week. And also the pay is not so well. So that is from the trainee doctors' perspective. From the government's perspective, however, they think that they have already addressed to a certain extent the salary. Their problem is that they say Korea is becoming an aging society, which means that there will be a bigger need for doctors in the future. And for that reason, we will need to have more medical students now. And also the Korean government is worried about the medical help in remote areas. They're saying that it is more difficult for right now for people living in remote areas to get health access, which is what they're trying to boost. And they are also worried that many senior doctors will soon retire. The trainee doctors' answer to this is that so far, actually, Korea has one of the best healthcare systems in the world. So there is no immediate need for doctors. That's why they're so angry. So right now there is a big problem, a big standoff with the doctors and the government. But the government has been saying that they're open for negotiation.
Right, indeed. Celia, speaking of strikes, I understand a strike by workers at the Eiffel Tower, which was settled there over the weekend. Yeah. It did cause quite a bit of concern last week, especially ahead of the Olympics, the Summer Olympics in Paris, right, this year.
Exactly.
Could you tell us about that protest and its implications?
Yeah, sure. Indeed, last week, the workers at the Eiffel Tower started protests, mostly to complain about the bad maintenance of the infrastructure. They were complaining about the appearance of rust on the steel. The building is more than 200 years old. It's a quite complicated structure to maintain also. And Gustave Eiffel, the engineer at the origin of the project, mentioned at the time of the construction, the most important thing is do not let it rust. Rust, as we know, is irreversible. Once it's there, it's really difficult to get rid of it. The tower needs to have a paint refreshed every 7 years, so the steel is not affected by the environment, the air, the pollution, the rain also. So it is a job that needs to be done very regularly. And the last layer of paint in 2020 had major delays. Still now, I think something like 20% of the whole work is done. So very much delayed. And the budget allocated to that issue is also at fault. The tower needs 100 million euros every year. And the city of Paris only allocated 50 million. So it's only half the cost. That's the big issue. To reassure you, the tower will not fall tomorrow. It's still a lot of good health, and the city of Paris is trying to reassure also the people for that. So you will be able to see it this summer for the Olympic Games, but there will maybe some work going on in this summer.
But hopefully people will be able to enjoy the tower this summer, right, during the Olympics. Malene, on the diplomatic front, foreign ministers of South Korea, Japan and the US met in Brazil on the margins of the G20 meeting last week. Could you tell us a bit about their talks? And do you believe these trilateral talks will serve to perhaps ensure some form of greater stability here on the Korean Peninsula?
Yes, so this new talk is just the newest in a bunch of previous talks that has been between South Korea and Japan and America. So as far as I believe, the last time the foreign ministers were meeting was in November, as far as I recall, last year. So there has been a few months since the last meeting. And yes, I do believe that these meetings are definitely strengthening the diplomatic ties, especially because we have seen that the diplomacy again between Japan and Korea has not always been so stable and so good. So ever since Yoon Suk-yeol took power, he has been working a lot to make better diplomatic relations with Japan. So that's one thing. What they were talking about more specifically has not been fully enclosed to the media. What we know is that they have been discussing and having what they called a fair chat about China, an honest talk about China and Chinese issues. However, they have not delved into exactly what kind of issues they have been talking about regarding China. Regarding North Korea, they have been discussing their nuclear program, as well as the military cooperation that is believed to take place between North Korea and Russia at the moment. One other thing that I personally am very curious to hear if they have been talking about, it has not been disclosed, but if they have been talking about the recent invitation that Kishida Fumio, Japanese Prime Minister, has received from Pyongyang to an alleged state visit that might actually take place already in June. So what we know is that North Korea has said that they are now open to possibly inviting the Japanese Prime Minister to Pyongyang for some diplomatic talk and for strengthening the diplomatic relationship between North Korea and Japan. And this comes, as we know, right after North Korea has said that unification with South Korea seems impossible at the moment. That might be why they're turning to Japan. However, if Japan will go to Pyongyang, and also if this topic was even touched upon at the trilateral meeting, is not something that we know yet.
Right, and it also followed, of course, South Korea's establishing of diplomatic ties with Cuba, right, a long-time North Korean ally. Celio, another issue touched on during the actual G20 summit in Brazil was the idea of UN reform. There have been calls for UN reform, of course, over the years. Where does France stand as a member, of course, of one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council? Where does France stand with regard to the idea of reform of the United Nations?
France has been pushing for reform since quite a long time, actually. In November already, the French ambassador to the UN expressed in a letter to the institution the need for critical reform. As you mentioned, France sits on the Security Council of the United Nations, and that's a place where there is a much needed reform, according to the French ambassador. The French delegates estimate we need to change the way the institution works, because since its foundation in 1945, the world has greatly changed. New powers have emerged, and the UN needs to make a place for this voice to be heard. France called for the Security Council to be augmented to 25 countries sitting at the table. That's a big change from the 5 present and the observer around them. They quote some countries like Brazil or India now are big powers in the game, so they need to be considered as their right level. Also, Africa also is a major and probably will be even more important in the near future. So that was France is pushing for in the United Nations.
And what are your personal thoughts with regard to reform for the UN Security Council?
I mostly agree with that idea. Indeed, the world has greatly changed since 1945, and we need to account these changes in South America, in Africa, in Asia also.
Right, of course. And Malene, staying with diplomacy, President Yoon Suk-yeol recently delayed his trip to Denmark. And while we wait for those bilateral talks to actually take place, what can you tell us about the areas of mutual interest between South Korea and Denmark?
Well, these years, South Korea and Denmark has been having closer and closer cooperation, especially when it comes to climate and to green energy. So I know that South Korea is very interested in Danish windmills and in Danish agriculture as well, and our methods to make agriculture in a greener and more sustainable way. So far, last time the Danish environment minister visited Korea, which I believe was last year, he came here to discuss ways to make South Korea's agriculture more green. And actually there has been a discussion about whether South Korean farmers should come to Denmark to learn some things about how we make sustainable and greener ways of producing farmland and cows and those kind of animals. Moreover, I also know that Denmark very much shares Korea's interest in urban mobility. Korea is one of the leading countries when it comes to developing urban mobility. And actually, Denmark has a small city called Odense, which is the ideal place for these urban mobility tests to take place, partly because that the city is located close to the sea, so it's possible for the so-called flying taxis to fly out over the sea so we can test run them. So I also know that that is an area that Korea and Denmark shares interest in and that they want to work more on implementing.
Right, indeed. Celio, a number of leading IT figures are also taking a greater interest in Korea's AI chips, I understand. What does that tell us about the potential that the country holds with regard to AI chips?
Yeah, this week the Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Meta, is going to Korea for a big visit, actually. It's the first one in 10 years. He came last time in 2013 to visit President Park Geun-hye, and at the time it was also quite interesting. It was quite early for Meta to go abroad and meet the Korean partners. This time he is expected to meet President Yoon Suk-yeol and also Samsung chairman Lee Jae-yong. So I think there could be some partnership going on. We'll see what the result of the discussion will bring. Meta has been quite keen on AI recently. They announced they wanted to call what they call the AGI, which is a next generation AI, much more than what we know now with ChatGPT, for example. But for all that, Meta needs a lot of chips and semiconductors, which Korea produce quite heavily. On the other hand, also Meta has been reliant on NVIDIA, which is Samsung's competitor, but the price have gone up. So Samsung can be an alternative for Meta to acquire its chips. Also, it seems Mark Zuckerberg is planning to develop a new headset, a bit like the Apple Vision Pro that came out recently. And there will be some talk with LG to develop that project. So we'll see if Korea can deliver, but apparently for the tech giant, Korea is the new place for tech.
Right, so the prospects are looking quite bright then. Malene, moving forward, the Yoon administration has declared intentions to designate, I believe, July 14th as a day for North Korean defectors. Could you give us a bit more details about these intentions and why do you suppose they are significant?
Well, what the Yoon government is trying to do is to make the North Korean defectors feel more like they're a part of South Korea. And I think it is partly because North Korean defectors has been and are still very stigmatized in the Korean society. It's very difficult for the defectors to get jobs, to socialize, to get South Korean friends, which I generally think stems from some South Koreans still seeing North Koreans, even though they're defectors, as essentially people born in North Korea and thereby, to a certain extent, enemies or spies or people who are plotting against South Korea. So what Yoon Suk-yeol is trying to do with designating July 14th as a national North Korean Defectors Day is to show that the North Korean defectors are still part of the Korean society. And I think he has done several other initiatives. One of them is that from now on, he will no longer refer to North Korean defectors as North Korean defectors. However, he will refer to them as residents with a background in North Korea. And I think this change of language is very symbolical, but it's also very important because it shows that they are residents in Korea. They are Koreans. They just have a background in North Korea. And I think that is a much nicer way of referring to North Koreans than merely calling them defectors or North Koreans, which kind of has a negative cling to it. It is a way of promoting inclusion in the society, and also I think the day has a symbolical meaning, as it is the same day that the law ensuring support for resettlement was passed in 1997, as I believe. And the North Korean Defectors Society community has taken really good, they're really happy about this new law. They think it's a very good idea, a very good opportunity for them to also speak up about some of the injustice that they're experiencing, and also as a way to feel like a bigger part of the South Korean society.
Right, indeed. And Celio, with regard to North Korea, security pundits meanwhile claim that Pyongyang is using Ukraine as a live testing ground for its weapons. Is this the view shared by pundits perhaps that you've covered while doing stories on security concerns raised by North Korea?
Yes, it seems to be a win-win situation for North Korea. First of all, they can give Russia what they want and deepen the relationship they're trying to build with Vladimir Putin. And second, it does give them an opportunity to test on actual condition, war condition, the missile they developed for many years. However, there is a risk for them doing so. The North Korean missile that crashed in Kharkiv, Ukraine, in January was scavenged after its impact. And a British researcher found that all the components inside, and they could trace it back to US companies, German companies, even Taiwanese companies. So that shows how can North Korea smuggle conductors or components from outside.
Especially amid the sanctions, right?
Yeah, that's the issue I was going to say. Now we know North Korea, we know a bit more how they go around the sanctions. So the US might try to impose new sanctions or strengthen the way they control it. And also with this component, now we know the performance of the missile. So we might be able to protect ourselves a bit more from the missile.
Right, hopefully, of course. Malene, Denmark, for its part, actually, has decided to deliver all of its artillery shells, I hear, to Ukraine. Could you tell us about this decision and the Danish public's response to this particular decision?
Yes, I think it's a very drastic move from the Danish government in order to ensure a public show our support to Ukraine. I think for Denmark, still the majority of Danes are definitely supporting that Denmark is helping in the war in Ukraine against Russia. I think we have seen a lot of European media has these days been reporting about some kind of war fatigue in European countries, where more and more citizens are slowly getting tired of the war and also getting tired of donating so much money, so much military equipment to Ukraine. However, I would say in Denmark it is quite the opposite, actually. The majority of Danes, the far majority, are still heavily supporting the war, at least helping Ukraine in the war and supporting that we should still fight against Russia. I think it's partly because we look to our other Scandinavian neighbors, Sweden and Finland, and we see how scared they are. And Finland and Sweden are both very close to Russia, so they definitely have the need of feeling very scared. So it seems very close to our Nordic identity as well. However, obviously, this move has also resulted in some criticism, partly because a lot of Danish military people have been out saying that now we can virtually not defend ourselves if we were to be attacked. And I think a lot of Danes also feel very worried about this, in particular because of the remarks made by President candidate Trump the other day, saying that if a country has not donated 2% of its budget to NATO, then America, with Trump in lead at least, would not want to defend that country. And to be completely fair, Denmark has for many years not donated 2% of our budget to NATO. So we would be in the shooting lines, so to speak, if Trump becomes president, if someone is attacking Denmark. And I think that is definitely, even though there is a small risk, it is worrying a lot of Danes.
Right. Well, that former US President Donald Trump triggered quite a bit of a concern with those radical remarks, I suppose. All right, well, that's all the time we have for this edition. And Malene, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And
thank you for having me.
Right. Celio, it was your first time here, but thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Right. Well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.